No, a good tune, even if you did write it.
Yeah, even if I did write it, it is a good tune. Yeah, yeah. Even if I
Uh,
say so myself, yeah, it's all
yep,
right.
that is a good one, and it fits the mood of the show, the tone.
Yes, it's mad.
Well, how's everybody doing tonight? You doing all right, Lee? Looks
Yeah, I'm
like your
doing better.
hands are
I'm
doing
doing better.
better. I heard you in there practicing
Yeah,
backstage
my
before
vocals
the.
is starting to improve a little, but still no high notes. But
Well,
hey,
from what I heard, it was amazing. It sounds even better than you ever did. So I think
my
something
hands
happened, and you've got this new,
getting
exciting
better.
singing voice that's just going to blow people away.
Yeah, it's got a bit
It's
more of
my
a rough
story,
edge
and
at the
I'm
moment.
sticking
Yeah.
to it.
It's pretty rough at the moment. Yeah, it's almost like I'm a rock singer, but not at all. No.
Heard you do a little Elvis riffing back
Yeah,
there.
but I won't do it because oh, mind you, we don't advertise, so it's all good.
Yeah.
But I won't indulge. That's
They'll have to come Saturday night on your channel if they want to see that, right?
Well, that's the idea, I mean,
Yeah.
I don't. I mean, this Saturday I'm liable to be pretty not on form, but it's fingers crossed. You know,
Yep. I think you'll be healed up and ready to go by then. Well, who we got here? You're in the chat. Ted Branston's here. D
hi Ted,
Rock is
all
in
right,
the
mate. D
house.
Rock, how you doing?
Scott L.
Scott Al, how you doing?
Is that Scott's life or is that somebody else?
Um, I don't know actually. No, because
That's how Nicole.
unless.
Nicole's doing good. Hello, Nicole. She's watching, and Nicole and the baby are listening.
Hi Nicole, how you doing?
3 weeks, 5 days if he goes to the full 40 week.
Mate,
But
you need to
I'm
get a
thinking
clock up
it's
or something, or a countdown clock
yeah.
behind you.
I think it's going to be the last week of August, maybe even the last day of August. I just have my
Got a funny
suspicions.
feeling of you.
Yeah. So we shall see.
Yeah, there you go. See, he's a different Scott.
Different Scott. There's a Scott's life that comes in here, and I didn't know if you or him with a different name or what. But welcome in, Scott L. Good to see you.
Makes sense. So he can. I'm sure he can understand. It makes sense when it's
Yeah.
Scott Al and Scott's life. you
Well,
know.
let's see what we've got tonight. Why don't you? This is from the Exeter, New Hampshire UFO Festival from 2016. The Exeter, New Hampshire Public TV presents presentation of Paul Eno, who will be delving into what we know or don't know about UFOs, cryptids, and ghosts, and how they may be connected. It's a great video. I watched part of it earlier. Links in the description there for the Exeter UFO Festival and Paul Eno online at behindtheparanormal.com and Exeter, New Hampshire Public Television at exeternh.tv. Furthermore, this video falls under fair use. Copyright disclaimer under Section 107 of the Copyright Act of 1976. Allowance is made for fair use for purposes such as criticism, comment, news reporting, teaching, scholarship, and research. Fair use is permitted by a copyright statute that might otherwise be infringing. Nonprofit, educational, or personal use tips the balance in favor of fair use. The staff, management, Lee nor myself, anybody here from beyond, we do not own this content. All credits go to its rightful owners. No copyright infringement is intended. So there we go. Got our business out of the way.
That's it, mate. Yeah.
Did anybody here see me on Spaced Out Radio over there with Dave Scott last night?
I still
Ended up
have to.
doing
I'll
all
have to
three
watch it.
hours with Dave. He has me over there every couple months or so. That was a really good show last night.
Well,
Yeah, nobody.
I
Well,
shall have to
it
go
did
back
run
and
late.
have a
It
look.
started at midnight on the East Coast and ran till
Yeah,
3
see,
a.m.
it's really
So,
late for me. That's like 5 a.m. and 5 a.m. for me,
yeah,
something like
so
that. So I'm not going to be liable to be watching that.
yeah. Dave has an ardent bunch of supporters over there. Has a good show. I think it was like 250 or 60 or something in there
Scott L.
watching
It was
last
on
night.
Spaced Out Radio. Spaced Out Radio.
Yeah. SOR, Dave Scott, Canadian.
Yeah,
He's from British Columbia. Easy for me to say. British Columbia,
yeah.
BC. Hey, Charinator, how you doing? Good to see you. Hope you're doing well, Stephen. That's my Scottish
Stephen,
brother.
how you doing?
And Lee is my British mother or I'm sorry, British brother, another mother.
And you're my other mother brother.
That's correct.
Yeah, man.
All right. Well, we can go ahead and get started here with that UFOs, cryptids, and ghosts. It sounds like a lot of fun. Everybody enjoy. We'll be here bantering back and forth with our witty repartee, or maybe
on
just
occasions, yes, we will butt in, no doubt.
Yeah. All right, Lee, roll that beautiful green footage,
we're
sir.
going to roll. Here we go. So you're going to hear a bit of an echo, mate, unless you mute now. Here we go. Let us know if the sound is okay, guys.
So I'm very happy to introduce our next speaker, Paul Eno. His bio is not in front of me. I'm like the best MC. I have no information in front of me. But I will say Paul does a great radio show. I've been a guest on it, and he's interviewed many other interesting researchers. He's one of the real great resources of this area and really of our field. He's not just interested in UFOs. He's got a very broad, almost a comprehensive interest in any of the weird things in our world that populate our world, whether it's UFOs or cryptids, ghosts. And it's the kind of out-of-the-box thinking that makes our world much more interesting, and it also, I think, gets us a little bit closer to the truth about what we're actually living in. I have felt for a long time that our reality is much greater than our sensory ability to understand. You know, we have certain abilities to perceive things, but then there's the whole rest of the world and all the electromagnetic spectrum we don't pick up and all the other things that are there. And sometimes that may be what our experience of the paranormal is, and this is the kind of information that Paul is interested in. So Paul will be speaking I'm going to read his little intro. More strange connections, UFOs, cryptids, and ghosts. Let's welcome Paul Eno.
What do you do when you're young? I suppose today you would call it a ghost hunter. I don't like that term. It was invented by the media, by the way, which I'm a member. And you encounter not only ghosts, quote unquote, but you encounter UFOs, Bigfoot, and other cryptids, a cryptid being something like Bigfoot, an unclassified creature that is not supposed to exist, and et cetera, and even some things that have not even been labeled yet. And that happens very often if you expand your search beyond a particular family or a particular home. You end up with what we call a flap area. But as an example, our latest case, and we'll get into this case in some detail as we go, Western Pennsylvania, May 20th of this year, a new flap area and more strange connections. Now, if you look at the history of this rather undisciplined field, you find people who investigate ghosts, you find people who investigate UFOs, and people who investigate Bigfoot, et cetera, but very few who draw any connections between any of these phenomena. I think that's beginning to change. So let me go back and do a little history. As I say, we'll get into this case in a bit. Okay, believe it or not, that's me on the right. And I started out, of all places, in the seminary studying for the priesthood. Okay. Now, you may be surprised to hear that I spent 10 years in seminaries. I entered St. Thomas in Bloomfield, Connecticut at the age of 14, this one there, and back when you could still do that. Fortunately, they don't allow that anymore. You have access to human beings, even people of the contradictory gender, up until the major seminary stage, so that was good. However, I did not. I started at this point in the 1970s with my first cases. And one of the reasons that I got interested in the paranormal, really the primary reason, was something that it took me a very long time to talk about. Those of you who have heard me spoke before may have heard me mention this. But at the age of 7, I witnessed my father's suicide. Extremely difficult, as you can imagine. That word doesn't even describe it. But at the time, I was in a very strict Roman Catholic school with the Sisters of, well, they called them Sisters of Mercy, don't believe it. Some of them were saints. Others were, had they not been nuns, potential axe murderers. Fortunately, in second grade, when I was 7, I had one of the saints, Sister Mary Joel, and she got me through this. And it was difficult enough losing my father, but being in an environment where you were told that if you ate a hot dog on Sundays, I should say Fridays, you would go to hell, and did things like that, and committing suicide was one of the biggies. And I said, this wonderful man who was home at a time, you know, because of his health, at home at a time when it was very unusual for a father to do that, he went to hell. And Sister Joel said, in so many words, well, God is kind of bigger than all that. And thank God for Sister Joel. So I did enter the seminary myself, and I still wondered what happened to my father. It is the ultimate question. When you're lying on your deathbed, your bank accounts, all the stuff we worry about day to day, gives way to the question, will I be okay? Will my loved ones be okay? And people have come to me and said, you gave up the seminary. Well, they gave me up. You know, you could have had a great career to do the paranormal. I said, what is more important than these ultimate questions? Nothing to us. So in any case, I did enter the seminary with the question in my mind, what happened to my father? And I ran into the doctrine of purgatory. And anybody who has encountered the Roman doctrine of purgatory is essentially the idea that if you are not quite bad enough to go to hell and not quite good enough to go to heaven, you go to purgatory for a while until you are purged, hence the name, and you can go to heaven after that, because you kind of have to make everything fit the pigeonholes that the Western mind insists upon. So I said, maybe ghosts that we hear so much about in every culture throughout history, maybe ghosts are souls in purgatory. And I actually decided to take on a case to investigate that. And Lorraine Warren, well, I'll get into that in a minute. But anyway, these are the 3 seminaries I attended. I was at this one, St. Thomas, when I began to investigate that first case. This is Wadham's Hall. I was there later on. And then in 1975, I decided to switch over to the Orthodox Church, Eastern Orthodox, Russian Orthodox, Greek Orthodox, and I went to their seminary in New York. This seminary was very supportive. They even let me help in exorcisms with a priest. So I was very surprised at that. And but these people did not want any of that. Keep your nose in your books, or you're out of here, and I was out of there. So maybe the church and I both had a lucky escape. So in July of 1970, I encountered this handy little article in the Hartford Courant newspaper. I'm a native of East Hartford, Connecticut. Not ridiculously far, but this told the story of a very, very strange place in Pomfret, Connecticut, which had a long history of very strange goings-on. And this man, whose name was Harry A. Chase, one of those wonderful men no community should be without, someone who knows all about local history and knows the cousin of every famous person who ever lived in the town, had researched this area, knew all about its history, but he said in the article that you'd go there and you'd hear strange things. He had a lot of interesting photographs of streaks moving through the trees and all sorts of oddities that he had taken since the 1940s. Well, I said, aha, maybe these are souls in purgatory. So I decided we're going to start with this case, got in touch with Harry, and then in August of that year, we headed out there, a bunch of young seminary students, and on the second trip we had Mr. Mercier here, who was a photo expert from United Technologies Corporation, and we brought him specifically because he didn't believe a word of what happened on the first trip. And just very briefly, to give you an example of how I started to wonder about the original theories, we walked into this place, hot August day, no birds. There were, however, the sounds of what appeared to be farm life, like a normal day in the life of someone else. And this started right away. You could hear people talking, dogs barking, cows mooing, farm implements banging together. And I mean, we were rather shocked. We got to an area, and I don't want to spend too much on this, but we got to an area where the cellar holes were, where the houses had been. And we took this picture, and later that night, we actually saw this baby-like figure in the tree. And this is the days before digital photography. We had a photo lab in East Hartford check it out, and they said, that's not a reflection. We don't know what it is. It's anomalous. In those days, we called it an extra, something that shouldn't really be in the photograph, that kind of thing. So this went on, and by the time we left there after 2 expeditions that year, it was fall. The last thing that happened was, on top of many things, including to Marcel, who didn't believe a word of this, he ended up almost possessed, and there was, in a not negative sense of the term, if you can imagine that, something was trying to save us from some danger, apparently. And then there was an ox cart driver we heard proceeding down this path, completely invisible. We heard the wooden wheels, we heard the hoof beats, we heard him yelling, "Hyah!" and the crack of a whip. Couldn't see him. I later found out I was related to these people many years later. I'd like to go back and try and contact, because you can do that, because I don't believe this stuff is what we think it is. So this all made me start to wonder, how can there be ghosts, as in spirits of the dead, of ox carts? How come we see them wearing clothes very often? How can there be a ghost of a whip, or the animals, and there are theories about how this could be, but it started to seem to me like we're dealing more with time than we are with death. So much for purgatory. These people didn't seem to be dead at all, never mind in some sort of purgatory. So that was a real shockaroo for every one of us. Time went by, and Lorraine Warren read something I wrote about this purgatory theory. You all know who I'm talking about? The Conjuring film by Lorraine Warren? Okay. And she contacted me and said, we'd like to talk to you. So we became great friends. This is in 1972, and they liked this idea. They, I guess to this day, even their website is supposed to be, quote, theological, unquote. But it's, with all due respect, because I had a lot of respect for them as people, it's sort of a pop theology that I did not learn in the seminary. And to me, if you're going to say you're Roman Catholic or Orthodox or whatever theology, a Christian theology of any kind, you should know what you're talking about. However, I find, not to digress, but people of all religions tend not to know what they're talking about, even when it comes to their own religions. But that's a story for another day. So in any case, we ended up getting together on a number of cases. That's after the major Bridgeport, Connecticut case of 1974, that was a barn burner. Now, a book has been written by William J. Hall. You may or may not have heard of him. Very excellent book, a study on this case, which is considered the best witnessed poltergeist case in history. Because, for example, we were there for 3 days. I stood there in the kitchen with 3 Bridgeport, Connecticut firefighters on one side, 3 police officers on the other, and we watched the 300-pound refrigerator pick itself up, move around, and set itself back down. One of the officers backed out of the house, backed down the sidewalk, sat in his cruiser, would not come out. In 1998, the daughter of one of the firefighters came to a book signing when I had first published Faces at the Window, which has the original report of this, and said, we couldn't find my father for 3 days. We found him in the apartment over our garage. He was too frightened to come out. World War II veteran. So this is the sort of thing that we encountered in that case. My job was to watch the little girl to make sure she wasn't doing any of this stuff herself, which the police later blamed her for anyway. And this is a diagram of one of the many dramatic things that happened on Monday night of the case. The Warrens had left to go be on TV somewhere, and I was in the house with a Bridgeport Post reporter named John Sopko, the family, which was a middle-aged couple with a young adopted girl of 10 years old, Marcy, and there was a neighbor as well. Marcy and I were playing Monopoly, which was her favorite game, and the others were talking in the living room. Very, very small house. So all of a sudden, the energy began to build up in the kitchen. And I had the feeling, I didn't tell Warren this because he wouldn't understand. I had the feeling all along that there were 4 entities in this house, and the best way I could describe them is alien. That is the best term to describe them. Their presence was utterly non-human, and the general theory in parapsychology, what a poltergeist is that, because we have to try and make it fit our narrow paradigm, that a poltergeist is something that takes form and is actually the result of the energy given off by what's called the agent. In this case, the little girl Marcy, who was approaching the age of puberty and was having a lot of issues in the house, and she was. Very, very overprotected girl. All sorts of ducks were lined up in order for trouble to occur in this house. However, again, I didn't think that was good enough. These were life forms, alien life forms, 4 of them. And on the case, among these other things that I'd recommend Bill's book or mine if you want further information on this case. But what happened was that 4 of them came down the hallway toward us in the living room. And they're almost bird-like here because I was standing here and everyone was afraid. I took out a prayer book, Orthodox prayer book, and started reading a simple prayer to Jesus Christ. The little girl kind of grabbed my arm because she was frightened too. One of these things, you could see a sort of a very gauzy, transparent kind of structure, came right up to me, and I instinctively pushed against it. And these things, bear in mind, are supposed to be spirits, demons. Warren was assuming these were demons or trying to get an exorcism done and all this. I pushed against it. It pushed back, and I felt bone structure. Like this. And I said, what the hey is, I was confused enough as it was. So what's this about? The thing got around me, threw the little girl across the room, and the energy in there was so powerful, I pulled everybody out of the house. Fortunately, the cops had cordoned off the street because there were up to 2,000-3,000 people out there, outside the house, and we didn't go out into the middle of a crowd, which would have been a disaster. So we're out there, and I called Warren. Long before cell phones, I had to run to the neighbor's house to use the telephone. Something came with me, knocked on the door, and there was nothing there. And I called the Warrens. It took them an hour to come the 10 miles back into Bridgeport because of the traffic created by this thing. So that's that. So again, more than the old ideas we're teaching. I just got the feeling, and again, alien life forms. That's where I had to leave it at that point, because we were thrown out of the case 2 days later because the cops, we had to go out and get something to eat. We went back to the Warrens' house, and I went back to East Hartford where I lived, and I heard on a station in New York, the whole world was caught up in this thing, that the police had declared that the whole thing was a hoax perpetrated by the little girl, Marcy, and I said, what is this? I went back to the house because the girl and the mother had hugged me and made me promise to come back, and I went back, and she had me thrown off the property. So anyway, that's another long story. It was chaos. We were fighting with the police for days on the radio, Warren and I. So then, by the end of the 70s, I was in utter confusion about what this really was about. Obviously, something bizarre was going on. This wasn't in people's heads. You had multiple witnesses to dramatic phenomena. And then comes the case right up the road here in York, Maine. And this really nudged me over the edge of saying there has got to be a better way to explain these things other than spirits of the dead and demons. This case had to do with, I was out of the seminary by this time. They threw me out in 77 because they didn't like my paranormal work, okay? As I say, maybe the church and I had a lucky escape, I don't know. But in any case, I was living by a lake in Connecticut in a little house, and working for the Connecticut Dance Theater, writing scripts, because the only other thing I knew how to do was write. I later became a journalist by dumb luck. But in any case, the phone rang one day, and I'd recently been on television, so people were starting to know who I was in this field. And the girl said, if I live to be 100, I will never forget this as long as I live. I said, okay, what? She and her sister had been in Maine, York Harbor, the previous weekend. They had been driving around a corner, and the younger sister they were both students at the University of Connecticut. The younger sister had been well known for her belief in the occult, in reincarnation, the whole 19th century schmear, right? And she said, we came around a corner. They had a convertible car. Came around a corner. She said, stop. That's my house. An ordinary ranch house on one of the back roads up there. She jumped out before they could stop her. They had some friends. She ran up to the door, knocked on the door, and they all ran up at this time too. A woman answered the door, screamed when she saw this girl. And then a man came to the door and said, once he found his voice, he actually didn't say anything. She said, "I apologize for bothering you. I just felt as though I know this house." The man said, "You should know this house. You haunt it." So I got to find out about this. So I didn't dare. I interviewed her, and I immediately sent her for the anybody here in psychiatric work or healthcare, mental health care professional. I guess not. All right, I'll have to say it. Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory. Okay, it's a MMPI, pre-diagnostic tool that I believe is still used to determine if you need any further treatment. In other words, was she nuts or not? And she was not. A little bit neurotic like all of us, but nothing to worry about. In the meantime, I said, I don't dare call this family because they had caught the name on the mailbox when they left, and as luck would have it, my mother and her family had a house up on Freeman Street in York Beach for the last, century. So I said, we knew people. So I got the name, I got the address, I got the phone number. I said, I wrote them a letter, put in every clergy, psychiatrist, whatever I had ever worked within this field, and I got a call 3 days later. They said, we've got to talk to somebody. The man's voice was shaking. So here's the story I got. They said they had apparitions of this girl walking down the stairs in transparent form, looking out the front window, doing all sorts of stuff around their house. And they said, we had become so frightened of being in our own house that we wouldn't be apart in our own house. We had to be together because it was so terrifying. The girl, meanwhile, said that she had had dreams of doing exactly what they said they had seen her doing, although not at the same times. So I'm shaking my head. What is this? Obviously, if ghosts are spirits of the dead, this ain't one of them. So I sort of, and one thing I let pass, because the girl said this, when she first saw this house, she said, the first thing that popped into her mind was not only the familiarity, but why aren't there any toys in the yard? Because in the dreams, she had been the mother of several children living in this house. And that's why she'd look at them out the front window as they were playing in the yard and all this business that they had seen her doing. So I couldn't quite fathom that. But to make a long story short, we ended up with some very, very strange ideas about what this might be. It raised all sorts of questions, as I say. And I think what might have been happening, at the risk of jumping the gun, was that we may have been dealing with what is known in quantum physics, which is a goofy but accepted area of science, with the multiple worlds interpretation. In other words, parallel realities. And in one area of quantum physics that many physicists accept, all possibilities, everything that could ever happen, ever has happened, and ever will happen, exists in concrete reality at some point in the multiverse or the metaverse. So in other words, if I take this laser pointer and drop it, not only will I have a laser pointer in smithereens, I will have created another universe in which everything that exists in this universe exists, except that this is broken. That seems to be how it works. And you've heard of the Large Hadron Collider in Switzerland and France at CERN. I have been told on good authority that this sort of thing is being researched, and the governments that are paying the bill do not want the scientists to talk about it. That's the beginning of the next part of what we're going to be talking about. Maybe the reason for all the secrecy in the UFO field. So anyway, 79, all these questions started to arise. And of course we have this woman who wasn't in the picture, and I don't trust pictures I don't take myself or that are taken by people I trust implicitly, because I learned photography at your expense or your parents' expense in the U.S. military, and I still don't trust my own judgment. Okay, I always have real good experts look at this, and extremely competent people, and I'm very, very nervous about showing a picture unless I'm really sure that it's legit. all these different things that seem to come up in these photographs, and people assume, aha, they're ghosts. Well, maybe yes, maybe no. People see, the big thing now is orbs, and we'll see some of those later. But don't be too sure what they are. Many questions would arise also about other areas, because the more we looked, the more I looked, not the Warrens. I broke up with them about 1978 because I dared question the gods of paranormal research, and there were some things they were doing I didn't particularly like, much as I respected them personally. That was so Ed and I had a peace conference at some friendlies in Farmington, Connecticut, and it was amicable, but see you later kind of thing. Questions would arise too about what about cryptids? Mothman. Everybody here know what Mothman is. It's an utterly bizarre series of events in the Ohio Valley of the U.S. in the 1960s. I remember I was a kid, like 8, 9 years old. My mother would show me articles about Mothman in the newspaper. Giant birds seen in West Virginia, this sort of thing. And dear old Champ, a neighboring state of Vermont. And the Phoenix Lights, UFOs, which I myself saw from an airplane, actually, on the way to a program in San Diego a few years ago, right in my own territory in Rhode Island, taken by Joe Ferrier, who was on the same radio station we are for 50 years on the afternoon talk show, since passed. And then a picture I got myself in Rhode Island of this, apparently what we refer to as a parasite, very important concept, which we'll get to shortly. So are there connections between these things? Why are they seen in the same areas, almost in the same places sometimes? What is the connection? So I would run into things like, gee, Paul, the neighbors have been seeing UFOs. This is in ghost cases, because you start looking outside the house. A lot of people don't do that when they're checking these things, and because most people shouldn't even be doing this at all. And people would say, how come you're looking in the yard? Well, I say, it's not just the house that may be affected. And they said, gee, funny you should say that. The neighbors were saying something's funny. Going, why didn't you tell me in the first place? If you can talk to the neighbors, which you can't always do because they might think you're a nut, you'll almost always find something going on. In this Bridgeport case, it wasn't all inside this little bungalow. And I told Bill when he was working on the book, I said, go and check your sources about what was happening in the neighbors' houses at the time. Sure enough, he found the neighbors were afraid to report it, but their children, who were then now growing up, had said there were funny things happening in their house as well. There was an uptick in UFO sightings over Bridgeport at the time. I can't say there were any Bigfoot sightings in the city of Bridgeport. However, other things were going on that we think could probably be related. Then I started running into stuff like this. Now, it took me a long time to admit this too, because we often on our show will question the validity of a lot of psychics and mediums, despite the wonderful people that they very often are, as far as how do you know you're receiving information from what you say, what it says it is. I don't trust people I meet on the street half the time. Why would I trust this thing coming to me in any way at all, especially through a Ouija board or a seance? I mean, why would you trust that? And sometimes with some of them, you wonder if ego is not involved. And we find that, we'll talk about parasites later. So now that I've said that, it may sound like I've been doing the same thing. So in 1980, Cheektowaga, New York, gotta love those areas around Buffalo and Niagara Falls, I encountered a family who said, we're hearing strange footsteps in our attic. Can you come and take a look? So I did. And I found really early on in the 70s that if I sat in an area with in a meditative state, very quietly, sometimes I would make contact, kind of like meeting a neighbor. Because I was starting to think of these not as spirits, but as neighbors in possible parallel, perfectly physical realities. Because that thing in that Bridgeport house that had a skeleton, that really knocked me for a loop. So in this attic in New York, I encountered what I can only describe as a bear-like intelligent creature of great nobility. Now you tell me, you couldn't make this stuff up. I didn't know what this was. And it spoke. This also makes me suspicious. How come all these spirits and stuff they all speak English? You know, I mean, this thing spoke a very, very odd form of Latin with very strange case endings. It took me 2 days to understand what it was saying. And if I got it right, and this is 5 years of Latin talk, if I got it right, it was on a quest or a journey, just passing through, and it didn't really understand too much about parallel worlds, neither did I at this time, but it seemed as though it was just passing through. And I often run into this. If you look at these entities and don't assume they're dead people, very often they think they're somewhere else. And this bear-like ursine guy in this attic said it was on his way to a place called Renthusia. Now, where the hay is, what's that, you know? And I said, okay. But again, I cannot stress enough the nobility and the positive nature coming off this thing, you know? So finally, at the end of 3 days, I said, okay, well, you know, see ya, or good luck. And then I never heard any more. And then everything stopped after that. The people never heard it again. So presumably, if we're talking about parallel realities, it may have just, the intersect may have been broken, or the overlap stopped, and it just went on its way. I don't know. But again, lots and lots and lots of questions. In the 1970s, I had a lot of Canadian connections. I have a lot of family there. And a Canadian soldier whom I knew said that his father had also been a Canadian soldier training near Woodchester in England for the D-Day invasion. And there had been a terrible accident, and a number of soldiers had been killed, had been drowned. And before it happened, they supposedly had seen this creature with their own eyes and had taken photographs of it. And later on, there were videos or film taken of it, a movie film, which I've never been able to find. But he swears that his father, till his dying day, insisted that he saw this. And they thought of it as sort of an angel of death. But keep an eye on the face if you can see it in this light, rather lion-like. This was, I think, an example of these creatures you can't even put labels on that turn up in multiverse traveling, or when you examine the paranormal from that standpoint. Not just bear-like guys from going to Renthusia, but these utterly, I suppose, unclassified kind of things that only turn up in folklore. Now, if you see this thing, what are you going to think? Angel, right? We explain things in ways that we can understand. And then there is this one, this almost hooded figure, taken outside my house, if you don't mind, by my older son. And Ben is here, by the way, my partner in crime. He's out manning the book table because he needs to pay his student loans. But so everybody buy books. So this thing was in the sky, and my older son was trying to take pictures of the stars or something, and he had a pretty decent camera, and he gets this thing instead. Speaking of strange intersect points and weird worlds, we live on this hill in Woonsocket, Rhode Island, that is really weird, but nothing negative. Nothing negative. Then you end up with things, I ran into things like flying humanoids. I mean, give me a break, but there's all sorts of evidence that they exist. And then you wonder, is it all in the mind? Now, we had on our show early on Dr. Michael Persinger at the time of Sudbury University, Ontario, and he invented a thing called the God helmet. He could stimulate near-death experiences, religious experiences, temporal lobe experiences, you might say, in the laboratory. And we were prepared to blow him out of the water, or try to, by asking him the question, does that mean these experiences are not real? And he said, no, it does not mean they're not real. So we became great friends. And this God helmet, as you can see it on this young lady, he said it was such a pleasant experience that students would come to his office and ask, can we try the God helmet? You know, because it was such a nice experience. But this got into questions of, what do we mean, is it all in the mind? Obviously, when I'm standing there with cops and firefighters and watching refrigerators float across the kitchen, obviously that's probably not a temporal lobe experience. So these questions also arose, you know. So if it's in the mind, it doesn't mean that it's not real, which is interesting because as a seminary student and as a grad student in psychology, I worked in psychiatric wards in 2 state hospitals in 2 different states. And I would very often see people who were diagnosed schizophrenic with the most knowing look in their eyes, with the sharpest and most brilliant minds. But because they felt they were living in more than one world at a time, or living in an entirely different one, oh, they're schizophrenic. And today they don't even keep them as inpatients. They fill their pockets full of antipsychotic drugs and off they go. Well, it's funny. I've addressed groups of psychiatrists on 2 occasions, and I would say this. Is it not possible that these people are experiencing real worlds, but that you're the ones who just aren't aware enough, and they're more normal than you are in a sense? And of course the fire comes out of the ears, and they, however, after the lecture they would come up to me and say, it's funny, not every one of them, but a lot, funny you should say that. I've often thought that, but I don't dare say it because I'd lose my job. There's plenty of politics in science and plenty of closed minds. So basically we're down to the human paranormal experience leads to the myth we create to explain the experience within our own paradigm. In other words, when you see a wispy figure sort of flitting through your kitchen, aha, a ghost. Or if you see Uncle John skipping down the hallway 2 weeks after his funeral, aha, it's the remnant, it's the recording, it's the residuum, it's the something or other, the essence, the soul, whatever, of Uncle John. It may be nothing of the kind. We make it fit because we can't understand anything else. Bigfoot must be just really, really hard to find. Can't be something else, because what else could it be? So these are the assumptions that we start to work with here. And this is what I began to question way back in 1971 at that abandoned village, because none of this was good enough. Here's what we all generally assume. There's a material world and a spirit world. Ghosts are spirits of the dead. I mean, this all may be true. Maybe we're wrong. But, this is just what we work with. I'm only submitting it because it works for us. They can walk, talk, dress up, think, remember, and drive cars, even though they don't have bodies or brains anymore. That's a neat trick. Nasty spirits or demons, and very good theologians. Now, involvement in 10 exorcisms in which I was dealing with these alien things that didn't seem to me at all evil, only sterile. That's the best way I can describe it. Sometimes the exorcisms worked, sometimes they didn't. And 3 times they were done on one 17-year-old girl. 3 times. And it seemed to work at the end. And I was a 21, 22-year-old seminary student. I said, I don't think that, like they're going to listen to me. I don't think this is a really good idea. At one point, I was holding down a girl with one of the attendants because she kept floating into the air. And this is obviously very hush-hush. One doctor had to be present. This is Ogdensburg State Hospital in New York State. And all of a sudden, this voice that was not hers comes out in what we later found out was perfect Malay. We had to look it up. And when it was translated, the doctor wrote it down. It said, it was to me. It said, I was there when your father killed himself. I told him to do it. Now, thank God I didn't hear that in English. I mean, talk about upset. I mean, this is the kind of thing we're dealing with. But but servants of Satan, I think this again is one of those things we make it fit what we can understand. I think these are alien life forms. Again, we're getting to the parasites that establish bonds with where they are us at some point in the multiverse. Very, very tough stuff. Again, we'll get into it later. Anything with wings that's weird but not scary is an angel. UFOs are spacecraft from other planets. Again, maybe they are. Some of them are at least. Maybe all of them are. Cryptids are just really good at playing peekaboo. Paranormal entities, including aliens, have the same motivations we do. My son has gotten in trouble on the air by questioning some major figures in this field about that. And anyway, ghosts, UFOs, and cryptids are not connected. Because investigators generally, until recently, do not investigate all. And now corollaries that come from this, eyewitnesses have to have bad eyesight. Now it's funny, I'm a professional journalist, because when I started, the only other thing I could do was write, so when they threw me out of the seminary, I wormed my way into journalism in Rhode Island, and luckily became a newspaper editor in the Providence Journal and a few other papers as well. And the first thing you look for is an eyewitness. My wife, Ben's mom, is a paralegal. The first thing you look for in a court of law is an eyewitness. I find eyewitnesses to be, in many cases, quite accurate. Now that's fighting words for some people, but I think that they do not necessarily have to have bad eyesight if they see a UFO, a ghost, or Bigfoot staring annoyingly through their kitchen window. The paranormal can be made acceptable to mainstream science. Well, first of all, mainstream science is based on with all due respect to it and scientists, is based on a completely outdated, materialistic point of view, scientific materialism, which has been totally blown out of the water by quantum mechanics. Science, by the best minds, is being rethought. Proving that ghosts exist will prove there is an afterlife. Now, the whole notion of afterlife is another can of worms. Proving that ghosts exist, of course they exist. People have seen them since the beginning of time. What are they? Who are they? Are there anybody we know? Mainstream science can define reality. It cannot. Mainstream science can tell you can describe something, but it cannot tell you what it is in its essence. Again, with all due respect to mainstream science. And then the biggest assumption of all, the island theory. All our memories, everything that's us is contained within our bodies and our brains. Physicists of consciousness, and that's a growing field, will tell you that is absolute nonsense. Things like memory, imagination are non-local. They're outside us. And it goes on from there. So these assumptions really lead to one great assumption when you question all those. This is the motto of our show. Everything you know is wrong. History, theology, anything about the paranormal, probably anything about interpersonal relationships, anything about epistemology, how we know things, it's all probably wrong, and we don't really know anything. So what do? We do the best we can. I suppose you have to go back to the Greek philosopher Aristotle, who said we start with a blank slate, or tabula rasa, as they say in philosophy, and we try our best to build up from there. And the best way we could find with the goofy stuff we were seeing, oh yeah, this is another one of our mottos, explaining the paranormal, it's the problem, it's handling the explanations. So where did we start? Here I am sitting in the trenches with an education in theology and philosophy, knowing nothing about physics, but seeing a lot of the stuff these guys were starting to talk about. These are all the pioneers of quantum physics. There's dear old Einstein, Niels Bohr, Werner Heisenberg, Schrödinger, all these guys. So we end up with the idea of the multiverse. I could not come to the conclusion that this is not what we were seeing in the paranormal. Nothing else seemed to explain it as well as this did. An open system with exchange of energy among worlds and probable exchange of inhabitants too. Multiverse experiences equal paranormal experiences, question mark. That's our opinion. You may disagree. So how does essentially that really work? This is a very crude analogy of this. And you can think, actually some scientists, some physicists have described the multiverse as a space-time foam, like the foam in your coffee or the soap suds in your sink, this kind of thing. And essentially it works like this. Each sphere of the foam is a world fully self-contained, but not fully self-contained. At times they interact, they intersect, they wash over one another. Here's a world where there are UFOs. And the big thing with the UFO studies, I think, is to determine, and there have been many learned minds who have stood on this stage over the many years of this fine conference and have said, here's how it could possibly work, nuts and bolts spacecraft, here's how they could travel to our planet from a gazillion miles away. And they may very well be right, exceeding the speed of light, things like that, that's fine. But consider, maybe they know how to bend space, how to create, if you want to say portals, they're already talking about wormholes, intersects, that would lead them right from there, gazillion miles away, to right there, without even moving, perhaps. I think that there could be a tremendous technology based on this, and Bob Schroeder, who has spoken at this conference, tends to agree. So that's all yet to be determined. Now this is, again, not a very good metaphor here, but I think this might be better. Ben and I talk about not only worlds, but world families. In other words, I walk I might have to stay by the mic because nothing else works. I walk from here to the other side of the stage. That is perhaps 100 or 1,000 or 1,000,000 different worlds I have passed through at that point. My foot held in a certain way, where I'm walking, how I'm walking, what I'm holding, all different universes. Nothing else may be different. Now when I suppose, I don't know whether these bump one another, but when you get outside of that, when that order, which seems to be created by the consciousness of the entire biosphere, in other words, you got up this morning, the sun rose in the east, and hopefully it's going to set in the west tonight, because the entire biosphere creates the conscious world. Some scientists think just people do that. I think it's bigger than that. So this is just a taste of what we may be talking about here. But there are glitches. When the wrong worlds intersect, you end up with Mothman. You end up with what happened to me the other day. I was taking a shower, and we had a comb, and Ben agreed with me on this. Until he got married and moved away, he had the same comb. He knew the same comb down in our downstairs bathroom, where I carry on my mole-like existence every day in my library and office. And the comb was white. It's always been white. I turned around, and it was gray. These are the little glitches in space-time, the little tiny overlaps of parallel realities, we believe, that happen all the time. How many times has this happened to you? You put your keys down on the table, and they're gone. You know, is it car key gnomes? I mean, maybe. All of a sudden, they're there again. We don't notice it really until you walk into that house in Bridgeport, and something's throwing knives across the kitchen and lifting refrigerators in front of the cops, the firefighters, and myself. That's when you notice it. Or it starts playing frisbee with your fine china. The general, everyday overlaps we don't really notice them. You know, we're conditioned to say, oh, it's just one of those things, and then you forget about it. One example, when I was doing graduate work at Trinity College in Hartford in the late 70s, I had a classmate who was in a psychology grad course who said, you know, I hate to bring this up. They always say that. I hate to bring this up, but I heard you're into this stuff. My grandfather, who was this adorable little Irish guy living in Wethersfield, Connecticut, had a hat problem. Okay? For a zillion years, he had gone for a walk every day, hung his hat on a hook by the door when he came back, and went about his business. Well, the remodeling had occurred in that hallway. The hooks weren't there anymore, and he just took it up to his room. Well, the hat kept appearing back in the hallway, disappearing from the closet and appearing back in the hallway. And this little guy was about 4 feet high, and he was a little Irish guy born in Ireland, and he literally was speculating about leprechauns. Okay, so I let that pass. Well, who knows? I mean, in the multiverse, anything is possible, right? And we managed to solve his problem eventually by I convinced him to do a form of meditation where he changed. You know, when you do something like that for years at a time, the more worlds it's occurring in. And that was kind of my theory at the time. I still hold to it. And it really takes a lot to change that. I had another case in Willimantic, Connecticut. I had been on TV with none other than John Zaffis, Ed and Lorraine Warren. I'm sure he's well known. He's in a lot of movies. He's on my show in a couple of weeks. And Ed and Lorraine Warren's nephew. And he was saying, well, you know, I hear these footsteps coming down my stairs. The whole family hears them. So I said, okay, I went over to his house several mornings. And I actually recorded him walking down the stairs in the morning. Because we very often do that in the very same way. We hit the same steps at the same time, at the same pace, with the same feet, usually. And then I actually heard the sound myself. We compared those sounds. They were exactly the same. I said, that's you coming down the stairs in the morning in many parallel realities where you're actually doing that. It's not a ghost. I didn't feel any presence. And he said, Eureka! Well, he didn't say that, but, you know, he sort of got it. So if we're right, I think we saw it. I never heard they'd had any more trouble. So this apparently is how it works. Parallel worlds equals parallel lives. And here's the real fly in the ointment. It's not just parallel worlds, but it's many different versions of you. Many different versions of you. This can be a really wonderful thing. I remember lecturing at Mount Ida College up near Boston, or from here I should say down near Boston. And I got a kick out of it because a lot of the students are studying to be undertakers, right? I thought that was kind of cute. And I love it when I speak at colleges because they ask great questions, and they always put me in some big armchair like Santa Claus, like at the end, and all the kids come up in pairs and tell me their own stories. Well, 2 freshman girls came up, and they said, you know, we have been, never knew each other before. Registration day, we saw each other across the crowded room. We've been sisters ever since. Why is that? Because I've been talking about human relationships in the multiverse. I said, well, I would say that at some point in the multiverse, you are each other. You literally are each other, and you share a life. They knew precisely what I was talking about, and they went skipping happily off, feeling that they now understood why they were so crazy about each other, right? I hope that was correct. I believe it was. But again, all possibilities exist. At one point in the multiverse, you are an alien in a spaceship. Because anything that can be conceived is in your mind or in the mind of some brilliant author or artist or composer or whomever, because it does exist at some point in the multiverse, and you're doing it in concrete reality. Why could Mozart sit down at the age of 4 years old and start composing violin concerti and do it brilliantly? Because I think he was, in his subconscious, which I think contains all these parallel lives, he was in touch and aware of the one where he really was a brilliant composer. And they merged. Talk to any shaman, and I have, and they will tell you in so many words, that's precisely what's happening. I spent 7 hours in Australia in 1979 talking to a little 4-foot Aboriginal shaman by the name of Minda Louie. And it was the most fascinating conversation I ever had. And he said, you're on the right track. That's what we do. If somebody needs something, we go into the parallel, well, he didn't use the term parallel world, but it's the same thing. Where that exists, we bring them together, make it real here, and the person doesn't have cancer anymore, or has what they need, or doesn't have what they don't need, that kind of thing. Now, a physicist would say, you collapse the wave function, the worlds were joined, like on that porch in York Harbor up here when they met, that couple who said the girl was haunting their house, they met, because nothing ever happened after that. The worlds were joined, everything became normal again, and they never had another paranormal experience in that house. And the shamans say that's essentially how it works. So at some point, and again, it's all simultaneous. Even Einstein was getting into this. There's no past, there's no future in any objective sense. That's just a function of our consciousness. That's the way we experience it. So you are Mark Antony giving the eulogy of Julius Caesar, the alleged eulogy. I thought I was kind of a wise guy myself. But that's, at some point, that's you. So the ultimate conclusion here is that not only do we have multiple lives, maybe infinite numbers even across the multiverse, but that we are, in every concrete way, each. And with all due respect, that I'm a veteran, nobody respects the Bill of Rights more than I do. But the notion of individualism as it is conceived in the West is horribly destructive. There is no such thing as an individual in the island theory sense of the word. We really are each other. Each of us is a unique expression of each other. That is really personalism and individualism as it should be, in my humble opinion. But this all seems to be borne out in what we see in the trenches investigating ghosts, UFOs, and cryptids. So let's move on just one little bit here too. A little bit into what we started with. All these ideas come to the methods and theories that we use in investigating what we call flap areas. And a flap is simply a huge, sort of an explosion of seemingly unrelated paranormal phenomena that occur in a given area that can be identified. Now here's some maps of areas we have examined or have looked at. These areas here, this is the Bermuda Triangle here. This is an area up near Boston. This is the Bridgewater Triangle, which is rather near where we live. And I'll show you some really fantastic pictures in a minute. Skinwalker Ranch in Utah, we have, you wonder, our show has reporters. I think of them more as a spy network. How do you cover a case of this scope when you're dealing sometimes with hundreds of square miles? Well, you have a spy network, and you try and make sure that as many of them as possible don't know each other. That way there's no suggestibility. That's kind of how we do it. And of course the Bermuda Triangle. famous. I've actually, when I was in the U.S. Coast Guard, I made the best of it when I was down there at sea, talking to witnesses, doing some work with unauthorized with some of the government equipment, like the compasses and stuff. That was very strange. The Litchfield, Connecticut case here, which has been a hallmark. I talked about that last year. And of course, Western Pennsylvania, which we'll get into in a minute. That's pretty spectacular. One of the cases that originally gave us the idea for flap areas is the Mothman case we mentioned in the 1960s in the Ohio Valley. And we've been down there. Mothman explained everything. No, it was the great, I consider him great, the journalist John Keel went down and began to document some of this. The local press documented it. But again, flying cryptids, most particularly Mothman, the press gave him that name, rather frightening creature we saw early on, giant birds, nightly UFOs, men in black, ghosts, poltergeists, clairvoyance, and heightened psychic abilities. Now, we were down there in 2003. I was down there with Bud Hopkins, and we were addressing the paranormal convention that was held in Parkersburg, right near Point Pleasant. And I talked to some of the witnesses of the original Mothman occurrences. They were children at the time, of course. And they would describe things like, we heard footsteps on our roof. We were utterly terrified. We saw red eyes looking in the windows. One person even saw red eyes looking out from under the furniture. I don't know if I would have stayed around long enough for that. But these are things that people remembered from the Mothman business. And a lot of people don't realize it wasn't just Mothman, it was all these other things. And what we always find, the military factor. We always find some presence of the military or someone that looks like the military. You never know. People blame the government for a lot of this. It might not be the government in all cases anyway. Somehow getting involved in these areas. We'll get into why shortly. Now, just to get into some stuff Ben and I have looked at very seriously, the Bridgewater Triangle, I'm sure most of you have heard of it. It involves, the center of it really is the Hockomock Wildlife Management Area, state of Massachusetts, Commonwealth of Massachusetts, 220 square mile wilderness area where just about everything happens and has happened since the natives were there. Black dogs, Bigfoot, thunderbirds, which are obviously giant birds, giant snakes, phantom pumas, that seems to become an inadvertent specialty of mine, or out-of-place big cats, ghosts, UFOs. At one point, there was a police officer who swore up and down that he was in his car and a Bigfoot came up, lifted up the back of the cruiser with him in it, and dropped it, and he almost, wasn't injured, but could have been. You name it, it's going on here. Now, when we started our research, this is before Ben was involved, I said, really the best people to talk to in a wilderness area are hunters. They see everything, and they notice everything. And sure enough, I found there was a lot of interbreeding between coyotes and domestic dogs. So you end up with coy dogs, which leave very strange tracks. So there were things like that. But there were also strange things. It started appearing in the paper. You have these, what are often thought of as Bigfoot shelters, that they do not fall naturally this way. This is not natural deadfall. And you had what is referred to generally as pukwudgies. Sounds like a cute name for a not cute little critter. I've talked to people who swear they've seen these things, not necessarily always looking like this, but they, according to legend, will lure you into the swamp and you'll never be seen again. And of course, the ubiquitous black helicopters, naturally. Now, when Ben and I started to look into this in 2010, now a lot of people have looked at it, books have been written about it, but we wanted to see it for ourselves. And of course, you also have, of course, the UFOs and ghost-like appearances in the cemetery. Everything's going on there. So what we did was to go look for ourselves. And Ben doesn't like me telling you this, but he's not here. Hopefully he won't hear me. Don't walk up to him and tell him I told you this because I'll get in trouble. He has many abilities that go beyond mine in the paranormal realm. He can, for example, talk to trees, okay, in a very no-nonsense way. According to this, there were a lot of problems with this area and the whole region is sick, okay. But very interestingly, beyond the subjective, we were at the head of Watapa Lake, Watapa Pond, which is a lovely area, and we just got the feeling we'd like to stop and take a few pictures. Well, looking around in the brush, we felt as though we were being watched. There was nobody else around. And we got these pictures. Now, the thing you bear in mind, again, I learned photography professionally, and I use it semi-professionally now. You don't find flesh tones in nature unless you're dealing with fungi. But these seem to be, Jimmy Church had his socks knocked off by these. These seem to be a head, in almost like a monk-like hood, and a full figure, and almost like 1920s garb. I mean, what is, I mean, I wouldn't call it fairies. I mean, you tell me, I don't know. But these things, they've been looked at by a number of experts, including the killjoy, my dear friend Mark D'Antonio from MUFON. And he really can't explain. He shoots everything down, but he found these intriguing. And, of course, we get into the Skinwalker Ranch deal. And Skinwalker Ranch, of course, is in Utah. We have not been there personally. We are not welcome, seemingly. Somebody doesn't want us involved. But you do see nightly UFOs, things coming and going through holes in the sky and holes in the air, creatures, apportations, movement by invisible means, apportations of objects and animals, ultra-bizarre cryptids, and poltergeist activity, time slips, ghost encounters. However, they might not want us down there, but who needs it when you've got Connecticut's Skinwalker Ranch, okay? This is the big Litchfield case we have been working on since '05. It was one of Ben's first cases. Look at the cute little tyke with the video camera at the age of 13. And it was his first case along with the haunted policeman of Vermont, which we will not get into today. But of course you have, for 1793 this place was built, and at first it was a store, and then one family moved in and was still there 6 generations later. Wonderful folks, whom I found out in the course of 10 years of investigation were distant cousins. I guess I'm related to everybody, including here. Anybody Connors, Johnson, Gordon, I'm related to. Anyway, from this area. Anyhow, we have the orbs, and this lady, Donna, and Bill Hall wrote a book about this. I suggested jokingly he write his next book about this case, and he went and did it. I didn't mean him to. This is the book, The Haunted House Diaries. And Donna in the house kept a diary for 62 years of all the things that went on in this house. You name it, I think it beats Skinwalker Ranch, and it is the weirdest thing that we've ever seen. For example, in the living room of this house, which I will show you here, there would be legs hanging from the ceiling, walking as though on a surface that was not present in our world. There would be box-like things dancing by the windows outside, horses galloping up and down the hallways, which you couldn't see, fortunately. And again, you name it, it was going on here. In this particular shot, I believe we have what is a world boundary. Physicists call them branes, B-R-A-N-E-S, short for membranes. And I believe these lights that a lot of people consider ghosts, maybe they are, ghosts and all this business, are actually the boundaries between parallel worlds. And what have you got here? You've got 2 versions of the same room in this area. And there's more in this picture, because years later, a listener to our show from Colorado said, how come you didn't mention the alien? So we looked at this, including Mark from MUFON. You can see what does look like the head of a gray sticking out here. And by 2009, they were, actually before that, they were seeing UFOs along with all this other stuff. And then the military activity started. And you had things like, see, you really can't see this very well either, but this is a sort of a transparent arm reaching around a bed. The very first day I was there, August 2005, I heard a horse galloping. Couldn't see it. Right by, I was standing up on this wall, right by me. The leaves were moving as if in the wind. And I could hear it galloping. Everything was perfectly physical except that I couldn't see it. Very much like that experience in Pomfret, Connecticut at the Village of Voices. So by 2009 and ongoing, you had all this stuff going on. Entire region seemed affected. UFOs witnessed by hundreds of people. In the town of Goshen and Torrington, Connecticut, people were getting out of their cars at night and looking at UFOs in the sky, crossing toward this particular mountain, Mohawk Mountain. Grays were seen in people's bedrooms. Military activity throughout the area, black helicopters, ghosts, mass changes in public behavior, which we were seeing. Again, the more you look at this stuff, the more you see. Maybe you're seeing it because you're looking for it. I mean, I'm open to that, but I don't think so in this case. People began driving on the wrong side of the road in ridiculous numbers, way beyond the statistical probability. Of course, accidents resulted. When that was mentioned in local social media and the local press, it stopped. People started driving on the wrong side of the road. When that was noticed, that stopped. Suicides began to break out in ludicrous numbers. When that was noticed, that's et cetera, et cetera. Mass changes in public behavior. There are a lot of weird things sitting on Mohawk Mountain these days. Bizarre cryptids, such as I've described. Electronic voice phenomena. At least 2 Bigfoot sightings. Now, there's probably no hope with this either. I've tried to show this video in the past, but I would refer you to the Facebook page of our show, Behind the Paranormal, on Facebook. Look at it in a darker room, you'll be able to see this stuff. But this essentially was, we were making a pilot for a television show with a very famous director. I can't tell you who he is because it was in the contract, but about this area. And so many weird things happened. Somebody apparently got to them. We have never even been allowed to see the footage because there was one point where Ben was lifted off the ground. I mean, I could go on all night about this. Maybe it was too weird, I don't know. And they also said we were too intelligent and we didn't get along, we got along too well. Father and son, big problem. They want entertainment, not science. There's a tree, and it was very, very cold, November of 2010, and one of the things that occurred that night was that the little boy in the house, whose name was Dale, said, he was 4 years old, his invisible friend Ashwar, which we assumed was A-S-H-W-A-R, was in the tree outside the front porch. So we went out and I pointed the infrared camera up into the tree, and I got this thing coming down out of the tree. Here's the normal picture, and I'm afraid you just can't even see it. There's no way the lights aren't on anyway. But look at it on the Facebook page, and it comes down, and it changes shape, and eventually the whole frame washes out and it disappears. Now, interestingly, the tadpole-like things have appeared in photographs from a number of places, and we were in touch with Gregory Harold from Florida, who got pictures like that on his security camera in the 1970s. So these creatures, whatever they may be, are known to some people anyway. But we changed the name to ACHUAR when Shane Searway, my esteemed colleague, who unfortunately could not be here today, discovered in the South American native lore, tree spirit, tree people, more accurately, spelled ACHUAR, Ashwar. This came out of the mouth of a 4-year-old child. What or who is this? He would often talk to me, and I get him on this subject. He said, well, Ashwar's people live in trees. Her people live in trees. So whatever this people or whatever this thing was, certainly was coming down out of the tree. So again, this is the sort of thing you run into in these flap areas. Now try this on for size. There had been a number of break-ins in this area, but nothing was stolen. Nobody saw anybody. So this one family put in security cameras inside their house. What the heck is this thing? I mean, I think back to reptilians and all this stuff that you hear about in UFO lore, and I just don't know what this could be. I can't tell you where this is because it's obviously the family's very frightened, but this appeared obviously on the security camera, this thing standing over the sink. But again, creatures, we have no idea even what they are, appear in these flap areas. Are there more flap areas than there used to be? I think perhaps they are. Many astronomers will talk about the leveling of the galactic plane. That it happens about every 600 million years, that the whole galactic neighborhood is flattened out, which allows electromagnetic fields to go blasting around the whole area and unblocked by planets and stars, perhaps thinning the boundaries or the brains between worlds. That's one possibility. So we are inundated all the time with new reports of stuff going on. Now that could also be just because the internet, there's constant information flow. We have more, so I'm told, more information in our whole lives, I should say in an hour or in a day, than people 100 years ago even had, not 100, maybe 200 years ago had in their whole lives. So maybe it's just the information flow, but something weird is going on in the neighborhood. Bigfoot sightings, at least 2 of them. And people say, oh, it's a rock. Well, I'm sorry, but this is a video, and it's very clearly a hairy figure walking across this field. And we ourselves went over and did an investigation there, and sure enough, here we had. And this was the cast of yet another television show that was supposed to occur. Maybe we were too old, I don't know. But the Bumble had not quite agreed to be in it, but we were, Meryl Streep was backing us on this because she has a house in that area. She says it's haunted. And the network still bugged off because they said, essentially we were too intelligent. And there is some evidence, and one of the producers quit the production company over this, of sabotage of the sizzler reel, or the promotional reel. So there are a lot of strange things going on here. But this would have been a great show. Of course, that's Mark D'Antonio from MUFON there. And myself, my dear old friend Lori Greer, who was a behavioral scientist in New York City. She was not going to analyze the Bigfoot, but look at the witnesses and what kind of, behavioral patterns they had. And of course, Shane Searway himself. I didn't know I was that short compared with him. But in any case, that never came to anything. And they spent a lot of money on it, on that thing, and it never came to anything. Yeah, see, we're being sabotaged even here. So also in this Litchfield case, you've got what I was later told after this occurred, the blue beam phenomenon, which is associated, as I'm told, with abduction experiences. We have several people in this area who claim they've been abducted. You have high-flying aircraft. I thought, well, how do you know this is anything but a plane? But analysis said this is a triangular-shaped craft. You have some very odd orbs and things like this. Look, you name it, it's going on here. Of course, the ubiquitous UFOs, and of course, the ever-present black helicopters. Now that leads us to the military. Now, the military activity was at its height in 09 and 10. People would walk to the edges of their property, say walking their dogs, or in the case of Mark D'Antonio's good friend, who had fished at this particular spot all his life, armed soldiers with M16s in camo or in black would come and tell them that they had to leave, politely but firmly. Okay? They could not go this way. Okay? It took us several years to check out what was happening. All of a sudden, and the military is not present anymore, but they were around at that time, and everything seemed to be centered on this farm that was not a farm. More of that in a minute. So just to sum up this, we do refer to it as the Litchfield Triangle, because these things really kind of do seem to occur in triangles. So we've got this farmhouse, which I just showed you. You've got the Goshen farm, which I'll show you in a minute, and point 3, which I see we're going to run out of time. We're not going to have time to talk about it. Point 3, Ben identified as the third point in the triangle. He believes that it was research being done how to generate energy out of portal areas or intersects between worlds. But we've since come to believe that there's something more sinister going on. So I'm going to go through these more quickly because we're just running out of time. Here's the farm where no farming was going on. It seemed to be abandoned. Strange things in the area, which, and again, my military experience is 30, 40 years old. So this, professionals have told me this looks like some kind of a Wi-Fi receiver. This is in the middle of nowhere, no houses. And here's what it looked like in 2010. Everything was taken down by 2012, except the 2 silos. By 2013, you had a huge metal sheet that could only be seen from the air, thousands of square feet in size. And you can see excavation has taken place around that. Okay, you had this, and we sent up drones. That's Mark again. That's Bill Hall, the author of the book, and Ben. And we're still investigating that. Lori, the environmental scientist, is a complete nut job, I think, because she walks right into these places. Don't do that, you're liable to get shot. So we're still investigating that, and more questions arose. Rendlesham Forest, we're all familiar with that, as the case of the 1980 incidents where the Air Force personnel were involved in landings and possible meetings. And this is a photo Larry Warren gave me of an actual photograph. This was taken out of classified files. Writing that was found on the craft, injuries still taking place on people's bodies. Our idea, this is a flap area too. Maybe it's the tip of the iceberg. Sure enough, we encountered, that's us there in 2012. That's Larry Warren, one of the witnesses from 1980. And these are pictures that we got on that night. A lot of strange things. At one point, Ben, who goes into trances, collapsed in the parking lot. Dogs started howling up and down the road. That was really, really creepy. And this thing, you tell me. All right? Now, if you look at this stuff, again, flap area, we think. A lot of the things that took place in December 1980 are still going on. People are still seeing craft. People are still downloading binary codes. People are still seeing strange lights in the trees. Everything that went on that night is going on except in the presence of a couple of hundred Air Force personnel. You have the Green Children of Woolpit, the Aldeburgh Sky Battle, where people in 1642 actually stood there and watched ships fighting each other in the air. The flying discs with sailors on it in 1916, people looking over the edge, and Kathy Martin has some new evidence of photos with aliens or whatever looking out. Disappearing cyclists, people, just the guy disappeared in plain view. Numerous big cat sightings. Black dogs, that's an old tradition in England. Rentals from four, again, UFOs, orbs, ghosts, time slips, poltergeist activity, even Bigfoot, or Yeti as they call it there, black dogs, all ongoing. So nothing stopped in 1980. Our idea of the flap area. A new one, and I do want to cover this. The Pennsylvania Triangle just started this year. We've made one trip there. We've got UFOs, Bigfoot and other cryptids, shadow people or ghosts, military interest as well. And we had met with, fortunately, it was a very unusual situation. We had a whole neighborhood of people willing to talk to us. We had a big neighborhood meeting, and people all told us these things they saw. One house, they said there were UFO sightings every night, and sure enough, these are pictures we got, triangular craft. That's me up in a deer stand that hadn't been used. Could have fallen in. The guy said, well, now I tell you, See, this is a beam of light coming down here. Now, you have to be very careful with flash photography at night, because it's going to bounce off anything. Bugs can look like streaks and beams and all this stuff, orbs and all this. However, we've been told, we're still having these analyzed, that this is in the distance coming down from the sky into the field. I already did that, all right. This, we don't know what this is. No enhancement, no flash, nothing. Happy Toes is showing up here too. Apparently, there was the state has been doing archaeological research here as well. Apparently there was a meteor strike on this hill, which is very strangely rounded, in the 16th century. So therefore it is full of iron. But before I was told that, I have a metal allergy. I can't even wear my wedding band, which was eaten by a chicken 30 years ago anyway. That's true. I would have had to eat the whole flock, but in any case, I can't wear it anyway. And I was really getting like a panic attack or something. I was shaking on this hill, probably because the iron content of the soil nobody told me about. So I had to pull off, but before that we found this big track, and with the toe marks very clear, and of course Bigfoot is seen in this area relatively regularly. Now Shane, as I was recovering from that, I had to go sleep for 2 hours to recover from this hill. Shane's sitting there in his truck, and Shane, I trust implicitly. He has the wonderful combination of being a Blackfoot shaman and a very, very feet on the ground, no nonsense, no baloney investigator, okay? He was sitting in his truck for about here, and up here he saw a hairy thing behind this tree, in the crook of the tree. He immediately took off after it, started this thing. The thing took off, flushed all these deer out of the field, and he could see when he got up there that where he saw its head, it must have been about 8 feet tall. So again, this is every day in the Pennsylvania Triangle. Other people reported they're walking through the woods in this area, and something dropped. 3 different people told me this, dropped behind them, and they just ran. And one person looked and it was a sort of an ape-like thing, not really a Bigfoot kind of thing, but all these strange cryptids, whatever they may be. And one of these shelters, again, this is not a natural deadfall. Something put it there. There's Shane putting up it felt like we were finding Bigfoot or something, and putting up these cameras. And the questions arise, again, as we come to the end of this. Apparently the multiverse is haunted. Being haunted is the normal state of reality. So if your house does not have weird things going, I mean mine does, all good. We have huge guardians we've seen with the naked eye, bear-like guardians. There have been all sorts of UFO sightings around our area, and there may be geotechnic reasons for that as well. But we get into the parasite kind of thing, and this is all the folklore stuff. And again, I think these are life forms that suck energy. folklore has called them demons, evil spirits, even vampires. What did the ancient Babylonians say when they used the word vampire? It translates literally as life-sucking ghosts. And that is what we see in these parasite cases. So again, why all the secrecy? What's the problem? Well, again, that goes to why the military is involved in every one of these cases. Even the Bridgewater Triangle, Ben and I were pulling around there one day, and there were all these mysterious, middle of nowhere, unmarked utility trucks, with all these guys in sunglasses lining the road watching us go by. I don't know. Circumstantial evidence, but who knows? If we're down here, we grew up with Star Trek and the Klingons and Chewbacca and all these guys. I think if we thought that there were visitors from somewhere else in the universe, they're far away. That would be great. However, if the multiverse thing is true and they're all around us all the time, sometimes your worst nightmares, sometimes your greatest friends, that is terrifying. That idea could really disrupt society. I think that is the secret. We've received death threats because we supposedly are very close to the truth. I hope we are, but I love it when people come up to me after lectures and say, now I understand what's happening to me and I don't have to be afraid of it anymore. That's what I want to hear. I'm not out to, some big secrets and spill the beans. So anyway, that's about as much as we have to. Well, time for a few questions too, but these are our books, a shameless self-promotion here. This one is a little late. It's still at the printer, but the original edition is available. Oh, I already saw that. And coming out next year, if you saw Cosmic Journey in my talk last, this is the same book, but the publisher wanted to change the name to Behind the Paranormal, Everything You Know Is Wrong. Great forward by Stan Friedman, and hopefully this thing will be out someday. And our show, and of course tomorrow, I urge you, all of you to come back if you can. Noon tomorrow, we're going to do our regular broadcast from here. No swearing because it's FCC regulated over-the-air radio, but come up, ask a question right here. All the speakers will be here. We'll have a great time. It's only an hour, so we'll have some rules that keep things moving along, and Ben and I run a tight ship. But please be invited to come back and participate in that. But for today, any questions, please come up to the mic. Yeah, we still have a minute or two. Yes, sir. I guess you can't come up to the mic. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, you're saying could we be inorganic objects as well? It's funny, anything that can be conceived because it's theoretically it's present in the multiverse. Now it's funny, a lot of indigenous peoples don't believe there's any such thing as an inanimate object. Everything, this shaman in Australia and another one in Quebec were telling me everything has a spirit. So maybe in those terms, maybe you can. Everything's electrical, right? So there you are. And the question, if you didn't hear it, was could I at some point be this cell phone or some inanimate, quote-unquote inanimate object? So I think anything's possible. We have a Halloween show. The station makes us do it. And we have often ended with the idea that the Great Pumpkin, watch Linus embarrassing himself by talking about the Great Pumpkin on Halloween from the Peanuts comic strip. And we'll say, well, if no such equivalent creature existed anywhere in the multiverse, Schultz, the cartoonist, would never have been able to imagine it. So somewhere or somewhen, in simultaneous time and space, there is something like the Great Pumpkin, all right? Maybe somebody like Linus. This is how wild this gets. Well, anyway, thank you so very much. Great audience, and hopefully we'll see you tomorrow at the broadcast.
My name is Dwight. I'm with Northeast Paranormal Associates. We're a group of individuals who are nonprofit. We investigate paranormal instances, don't charge any money for it. We do private homes, businesses, public meeting houses, old mill sites, whatever. Anything anybody's having some paranormal interactions, we'll go in, try to verify, If there either is something or not something there, we'll advise our clients what we came up with and advise them on what they can probably do if they want to do something beyond that. So we have outreach, education, and awareness training. We have a website with a lot of photographs on it, some other information about paranormal that people can go to and get more information. And if somebody needs a cleansing or something like that, we no longer have somebody on our team that does that, but we know people who do it that we can recommend. We try to keep it so they don't have to spend any money. So normally some people will charge $150, $200 an hour. We try to find people who will do it for free for them. Cleansings are usually somebody coming in with special training in that. We have a couple of people we know that are shamans. We have a couple of people that are mediums or sensitives, and they're trained to do a cleansing to get the spirits to either stop or move. And this was called a cleansing. Well, we have a number of electronic gear that we use, voice recorders, K2 meters, EMF meters, video, audio, a number of different tools. K2 meters, this K2 meter has been going off. There's something here. It's detecting something underground. We think it's this electric line underground here. So this is responding to some EMF energy in the area. This is an EMF meter. It does the same thing except it gives a digital readout. As I move it around, I'm getting different readings. It's very low level here. For some reason, it's setting that one off, and yeah, they hear it's fairly high. So we go in and try to verify that we can detect something one way or another. Photographs, residual energies, could be some electromagnetic energy in the area. Some people's homes have high levels of EMF. It's like you're getting too close to a microwave. You get tremendous amounts of EMF energy. Some people have that throughout the house. So, and that can bring on reactions to people. Some people are sensitive to EMF radiation. So we advise them, maybe have your electricity fixed or something. Stay away from that area, move your bed away from that electrical panel. So, but those are the type of things that we do. We have a couple of people on the team that are sensitive, but not really mediums. They can detect or feel ill if they feel something like that. But those are the type of things we do. And it's a free service. We don't guarantee anybody anything, so we don't charge for anything. We don't believe in people being charged for something, making something up. You know, we give them our honest opinion of what we think. So, use anything. This one happens to have night vision on it, so you don't need a bright light. You can still see things that are happening. Just to see what we can pick up, if anything. And we do get things like this with orbs. Some orbs are reflections of other things. Other orbs, you can actually see real details within the orbs. I tend to think of it as something like an amoeba or a paramecium, where you see little things inside the microscopic animals, and it's like that. Those are the unusual things that we go for. See if we can pick up something out of the ordinary. And you go, what is that? Why am I getting it this time and not another time? It flashes, looking for a spirit, and hopefully, I see the meter's kicking off, which is in response to this meeting. It's detecting some electromagnetic radiation out of the ordinary. We have a lot of public education things we do at local libraries. We'll publish that on our site when we're going to do a talk. We do a Paranormal 101, and people can attend those seminars. We explain what we do, show some of the equipment, tell a little bit about everything that's going on. So we attend a seminar. Some people say, well, when can I go to an event? We have some public events that we open up to the public, and then they can come and see what we do. We have a number of different tools that we use. Little ghosts we have for the kids. People say, what do you have the little horses for? Well, we encounter old spirits, children. So we're trying to attract children to something they'd be familiar with. They might not be familiar with an automobile if they're from the 1700s or 1800s, but they can identify with a horse. So, or a ball, try to get them to move the ball. So that one just got some little sparklies in it so we can tell if it's been moved. Something to attract. Now we have remote infrared temperature sensors where we can detect temperature. We'll point it at something, we can tell what the temperature is. And the idea is that cold spots indicates there's a spirit present. Noticeably cold, 4, 5, 10 degrees colder than anything surrounding it. So, and again, a lot of these tools we use are not ghost tools. They're scientific tools that we use in the paranormal investigations. So we've adapted them to that use.
Looks like that's it, right? But yeah, it does.
Well, that was different tonight.
It was. It was.
And I just realized that I was Facebook friends with Paul Eno, and I was going to have him on my radio show, and found out he passed away this year in April the 5th, I think.
Oh, that's
71
sad.
years old, had ALS, aka Lou Gehrig's disease. But a very storied man there, had a lot of experience in things, military, UFOs, all kinds of stuff. His own radio show on WOON in somewhere in wherever that is, New Hampshire. But his son that he had the radio show with is still active. So I've sent him a friend request on to see if I can get him on. But that was different. He put forth some stuff that I'd never really heard before, not in that context. What about you,
Yeah,
Lee?
it was different. Yeah, I haven't heard it like that before. Yeah, crazy. But he used to be a priest or something, didn't he? And then he left it for paranormal.
Yeah. And then don't know what was up with Dwight there at the end. He had a lot of state-of-the-art toys circa 2016, I guess. And, no
Yeah.
need for a second name. You know, there's like
No.
Jimmy and Michael and Dwight. That's all. You know,
Yeah.
and Lee, of course. You only need one name.
Well, that's it, mate. Well, I mean, yeah. So you only need one name. It sounds good when it's triple-barreled, you know, like Lee Anthony G.
Yeah.
Hello, Mark.
Well, I thought we were going to make it without any Stanton Friedman, but then there was a little thank you to him there at the end of the conference. So
Yeah.
it was interesting, though. Shows you what they get into in Exeter, New Hampshire. There's one coming up this year at the end of August, the first part of September. So if you're in the New England area and you'd like to go see a ghost convention or paranormal UFO convention, Exeter, New Hampshire, there's a link in the description that'll take you to the page.
Well, all right. Well, all right.
All right. Lee, what you got going on?
I mean, obviously tomorrow there's Radio 1FA back-to-back original tracks. It's a full pint of rock, mate, not half.
Indeed. And we playing some records, spinning some tunes, just hanging out and being groovy.
Yeah, no, I'll be just hanging out, playing some tunes, being groovy, you know.
So look forward to seeing you over there.
Being groovy, baby, yeah.
And what have I got coming up? I've got videos coming out on missing persons mysteries. Working on the next Dark Tales from every state will be Connecticut this time. So stay tuned for that. I'll probably have a live sometime this week, and that's all I can think of off the top of my head.
Yeah, because you haven't had a live where you've just been on camera on your own for a while, have you, on missing persons mysteries?
I had one a couple of weekends ago, so maybe I'll have another one this week. Do a creepy late night live. It was probably way past your
It's probably
bedtime.
because of the time you do it. That's probably what it is.
I went at I think 9 p.m., 9 or 10 p.m. Eastern time.
Your
So that's
time,
like
yeah.
2 or 3 in the morning for you. So,
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, it's a late.
but now I
start.
did run overnight, so you could have joined us in the morning. But I get it.
Yeah, but like I said, I'd have been pretty much asleep, wouldn't I? So I wouldn't have even known it's on.
Yeah,
Like I said, I don't really live.
yeah. That time zone
Phone.
can be a real sticky wicket there sometimes.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I guess that'll wrap it up for us here, unless you have something you want to add, Lee.
No. I'm all good, mate. I'm good to go.
Yeah, you're getting late there. You're probably ready to turn in, hit the hay.
Yeah, it's 20 to 1.
Yeah.
It's
Well, thank you
20 to
for
1.
staying up with us. And
No.
everybody, I'll see you a little further on down the trail. On behalf of Lee and myself, tell your animals we said hi. Watch out for all the spooky
everyone.
stuff, but stay spooky. Have a good night, everybody. And Lee G is going to play us out here with Forward Momentum.